Welcome back to BTR Boxing Podcast Big Fight Reaction Show. I'm your host Sean, joined as always by Johnston to cover Canelo Alvarez's victory over Jermell Charlo and Jai Opetaia absolutely wiping the floor with Jordan Thompson. Of course, there are other fights on this weekend which we'd like to touch on and reflect on what has been a relatively decent weekend for the sport in terms of the amount of fights and fighters being involved. And I think boxing season, I can say it again like I did the other week, I think it's truly kicking in now.
I think so. It's a good fight to have. We assumed that the fight would be a lot closer, the main fight, the main attraction of the weekend. Unfortunately, it didn't deliver. But, well, we can discuss all that now. But in terms of the volume of fights, there certainly was a lot of fights and some really good performances, some not so good performances, some terrible judging from which happens every bloody week. But all in all, good weekend. Enjoyed it.
So we're going to talk about the Canelo fight first of all, because that was the main fight that we covered for the show. And we talked about this fight in great detail in the preview. And I released a clip, a little social media clip going into the fight. And it was your comment, Johnston. It was about how Charlo isn't going to win this fight and how he'd have to, there'd have to be an accidental clash of heads or some sort of cut where it had changed the fight significantly. And I released that clip, and funnily enough, it pretty much went the way identically you said it was going to go, and so it's a really spot on, nail on the head prediction with this fight. It just it didn't deliver. Canelo looked great, Charlo didn't look great. Ultimately, Canelo moves on, and we can talk about some of the big fights now for him. And Charlo, well, I know he's been stripped of the WBO title as soon as he entered the ring, so the WBO title now has been upgraded to Tim Tszyu, so Tim Tszyu's now the full WBO super welterweight champion, and Charlo goes in there for a payday. I've heard excuses on social media. I've seen people saying his hand injury wasn't fully recovered, and he still went in there and he caused another injury again, apparently, in the fight. I don't know how true that is, but it just felt like a lot of excuses for a poor performance, and it just made me feel like he was literally there for a payday.
He was. The first thing I thought, the more this fight sort of developed, was I don't think he fancied it, Sean. I don't think he even wanted it. That's my honest opinion. I feel like it was the first fight for Canelo on PBC, and someone's puts a question to him and says, look, you can fight Canelo Alvarez, undisputed, super middleweight. You've got to jump up 2 weights. If you lose, you lose. But it's a win-win, isn't it? It doesn't matter how you perform. And he's seen the money. And to be honest, I wouldn't have even been surprised if he said, I don't really fancy it. But they're like, look, just take the fight, have the fight. It's the first fight for Canelo's BBC. He's going to look great. Your aim is just to not get knocked out. And that is what it was. It was like watching, when I would love me football analogies, but when you see a side show up and they park the bus, and then what happens is they get an early goal conceded against them and all the game plan goes out the window. Next thing you know, you lose the game 5-0 and you think, well, what was the point of that? And that basically was what it was. It was easy. Charlo's gone in there to survive. That was what it was. And the word he used, I believe, after was at least I didn't get knocked out at one point. So for me, I feel that someone was in his ear, said to him, look, you can earn a bundle of money. It's a win-win. You lose, it doesn't matter. Even if Canelo wins and dominates like he has, no one's really going to give him any respect for it because you've jumped up 2 weight classes. He hasn't. He should be actually just dominating you for the whole 12 rounds, which is exactly what happened. And for him, for Charlo, it's a win because he's come out on his feet. And he can make an excuse and people will defend him. It doesn't matter. Charlo's lost to Canelo's 2 weight classes above. He doesn't belong in that weight. And there's a reason why there's weight classes. And I think this fight is a great example of that, isn't it?
It is a great example of it. It's also a great example of somebody that should have said no, really, because regardless of the money being put to him, if his hand injury wasn't fully recovered, which is one of the things that I've seen, if that's true or not, if it's true, why did he get in the ring? Obviously for the money, 100% for the money. So it makes you feel like, what are the intentions of taking this fight? And I remember saying that on the preview about what were his intentions of taking this fight. Was he in it for the glory? Was he in it for the money? To me, it just feels like he was in it for the money, and it's more evident now in the aftermath of watching that fight that that's the case. So Charlo, as a result of taking the money fight, loses his WBO title. Yes, okay, he still holds the remaining 3 titles in the division, but he's no longer the undisputed super welterweight champion. It makes me wonder what he does do next, whether he just decides, you know what, I'm going to move up to the middleweight division and look at that, because there's some good fights potentially there for him. Or does he take this big fight with Tim Tszyu, which I think would be a really, really good fight, and I think it'd make some good money for him. It'd be interesting to see what his next move actually is, whether he decides, you know what, I'll go up a weight, try my hand at middleweight, because there are going to be opportunities there to clean up the division, and then maybe move from there. But I think the focus and the aftermath of this fight now is not really around Charlo, it's around Canelo, of course, because people are now wondering what is next for Canelo. Now, the two things in my mind, two fights in my mind, are these ones that I'm proposing. These are the ones that I think he has to do. Either David Benavidez at 168, or Bivol comes down to 168, because he has expressed an interest to do so, and he has said it recently on social media that he'd be willing to do that. So it's got to be Bivol or Benavidez at 168. That for me would be the next fight. One of them two fights would be the perfect fight for him, because I can't see who else he could fight at this point. Like, logically and honestly, what is the next fight for him? It's got to be one of them two, hasn't it?
I would say them two. I'd say David Benavidez is the fight everybody's calling for. That's sort of the number one pick. There's been murmurs of the Crawford fight. Look, again, it's just one of them ones you don't really want to see it. I mean, it's a big super fight. He's just, he's beaten the best in the middleweight division in Golovkin. He's beaten the best in the light middleweight division in Charlo. And now he's going to fight the best in the welterweight division in Crawford. I mean, he should be looking upwards. As you say, the Bivol fight with a Bivol can come down to 168. So I would scrap the Crawford fight. I mean, they put it to him and he sort of said he's not in my plans, but he's not saying it's not absolutely not in my plans. It's just, I don't really know. Again, this weight class thing, it's there for a reason. Yeah, Crawford may be struggling at 147 and maybe thinking about the 154 division. I would say that for Charlo, Crawford would be a better fight. For me, I think you could have a unified fight there. Obviously, he's lost that WBO title. So either he takes the Tim Tszyu fight and tries to become undisputed in this weight again. And remember, the Tim Tszyu fight was supposed to be there for Charlo anyway, and he changed his mind, whether it was his team or himself, that moved to the Canelo fight to be great, to dare to be great, and he wasn't. So the Tim Tszyu fight was always going to be there. So he's earned money. It's just been easy for Charlo, because he's like, well, I've stayed up, I've not been knocked out by a guy bigger than me, a heavy puncher, hits like an ox, apparently he said. So he can now he gets that Tim Tszyu fight anyway. Or Crawford. I think Crawford is a perfect fight. While Canelo takes on Benavidez, then Crawford can see, look, let's see how I am at 154. If I'm still strong and finishing people, knocking people out, like a Charlo, which Canelo hasn't done, then there's a call for that fight. That's a possibility. Even still, he's skipping another couple of weights, the divisions, just to fight Canelo. But yeah, Canelo for me, Benavidez is my number one pick, or Bivol. But will Bivol move down? He said he would. I think he would, because it makes sense for him, his money for him. So, yeah, the only other one that sort of, because he's a Mexican, is Jaime Munguia. He's undefeated. He's a Mexican. I know he's with Golden Boy, but the Mexican following will get behind that fight. That could be a possibility as well.
Good fights, really, when you think about it. I mean, look at Canelo's career at this point. Like, what left in boxing is there for him to do at this point in time? Like, what do you want to see him do? Like, honestly, I don't know what people's thoughts are on this now. Like, for me, the Benavidez fight would be good. That would be a good one. The Bivol rematch would be good. Both of them, I'd be more than happy at both of them sequentially. Like, his next two fights on PBC, I'd like him to be them, to be honest. And he could bow out. I'd be happy for him to bow out, because what else does he need to do in boxing? Because I don't think he does need to do anything else.
He wants that cruiserweight title. I think it's going to be a Jack, or it could be an Opetaia, who we'll speak about in a minute.
Well, Jax doesn't have the WBC anymore. He vacated now, Badu Jack. So,
oh, did he? Oh,
yeah.
Okay, right.
So
I know he wants that cruiserweight title, doesn't he? And I feel that Canelo will eventually get that chance against someone that he should be beating.
I think Makabu's fighting for it again. If I remember rightly, looking a couple of weeks back, I think Makabu is fighting for it again. I can't remember who the opponent is, but if Makabu fights for it again, chances are he might win it again. And then that fight that was proposed a few months back, where it was Canelo versus Makabu for the cruiserweight title, absolutely, yeah, you could see that being a logical step for him to take before he comes towards the end of his career. But let's be honest, we want to see the Bivol rematch at 168 if Bivol's saying he can do it, or the Benavidez fight. Either of them two fights in his next two fights, I'd be really happy with. That'd be me, the ideal path for his career. And then following that, if he then signs another deal with somebody else for maybe one or two fights, then you do get them cruiserweight fights, like you say. So I think we've got to be realistic and say that Canelo's probably got 2 to 3 years at maximum left. And really, these are the fights that we want to see at this point in time, because after that, I can't honestly envisage any other fights. After that, he's starting to become a little bit ridiculous with maybe the potential of him fighting certain fighters at certain weights. He then becomes too much of a stretch, I think, even for Canelo and even for how good he is. But ultimately, at this moment in time, he's the best super middleweight of this era, and he's got to face the challenges now. He's got to face the guys that are around him that we want to see him face. So if he does that and he wins and he goes on and wins them fights, then absolutely, he's still going to go down as one of, if not the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. It was also good to see, actually, Johnston. I don't know if you noticed in the aftermath of Canelo winning, the respect between him and Floyd Mayweather. And Floyd Mayweather at ringside, obviously, for his young protege, Jermell Charlo, who was on the undercard, who won by a first-round KO. I'll talk about him a little bit later on, but it was good to see the sort of respect between those two, and I think Mayweather, it makes you think, doesn't it, now? Like, we know we slag Mayweather off a lot, but I think it was pretty obvious when Mayweather took that fight against Canelo. He knew what he was doing. He knew it was the right time to get Canelo while he was young and while he wasn't as experienced, because he knew his experience and how young he was, or how much younger he was at the time, Mayweather and Canelo. It was the right time to do it, because I think if he would have got Canelo later on, more of his prime years, which is sort of where we are now, it would have been a much more difficult fight for him.
And you know what? We do slate him, and I'd say cherry pick. I do still think that in the last 10 years, I think he bided his time with certain fights, and Canelo learned from that, because he'd done the same thing with Golovkin. I felt that he bided his time with the Golovkin fight. It should have happened a bit sooner than it did. So, to be fair, you don't really get the situations where you have a professional fighter that decides to manage themselves and makes the right choices. You can't knock Mayweather for that. He looked at every angle, every position, every moment, and he picked his fights. And we can knock him for it, but he did win them all. Yeah, some of them weren't the fights we particularly wanted. They were a bit too soon or a bit too late. Either way, he won the fight. And people will look at that Canelo win, and they will say, do you know what, that just proves for the people that love Floyd Mayweather that he is the greatest of all time. That some people genuinely believe that. We have a different perception of that. And what it takes to be the greatest of all time, you do need to be able to push yourself at times. And I do feel the last 10 years of his career, he didn't quite do that. But credit to the guy, he finished undefeated. And he is one of the best defensive fighters that's ever lived. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I'm never going to say that he isn't, because, he's up there with the greats of defensive, up there with the Willie Peps. Yeah, unreal defensive fighter. But yeah, it's good to see that. Who knows what is in the pipeline when Canelo retires, whether they could get it on again as an exhibition, like a little 8-rounder, like like Jones Tyson did kind of thing. I could see something like that happening. But look, one good thing as well about Canelo is he looked back to his old best. His last two fights, I feel there were moments where I started to see some chinks in his armour, where he wasn't really putting his foot down and trying to stop his fighters. I still feel he could have probably put his foot down a little bit more against Charlo, but saying that, his punch output for 12 rounds and just how determined he seemed like the old Canelo that we had seen, that had just dismantled everybody in the super middleweight division, in terms of the likes of Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Caleb Plant. Like, he was back to that form again, which is great to see. It's almost like the PBC's free fight deals giving him injection of life, and he knows he's going to have some big fights. And the good thing I love about Canelo as well is when he does get forced into those mandatories, he's one of very few fighters that will take a mandatory and he will get it overdone quickly and move on to the big fights. Not many fighters do that. You have these champions that will just fight mandatories once a year and it just prolongs their career. Canelo is not one to do that, and credit to him, because he did look terrific, but Charlo was just pretty poor, wasn't he?
He was. Well, let's move on, Johnston. Let's talk about Jai Opetaia's destruction of Jordan Thompson, and that's exactly what it was, a destruction. I wanted Jordan to do well in this fight. I wouldn't make no bones about how I felt. I wanted Jordan to win the fight. Realistically, we both knew that this was a big, massive step up for him. Also for Opetaia, he'd had that time out of the ring, but oh my God, you didn't even think he'd been away with the way he goes in the ring and absolutely destroys Thompson. Like he was like a madman all week, to be honest with you. I was watching the press conferences and the interviews and the lead up to it, and you could just see he's got this desire in his eyes and this hunger, and even though he was the champion, it was like he was still the hungry fighter fighting for a title going in there, and he made light work of Jordan Thompson in there, which it's sad for Jordan, because obviously he comes in, he takes the biggest fight of his career, and now people are going to admit that was probably too soon for him, and you know, he needed more of a better accomplished resume moving up, because if you think about his fight with Vasyl Dubois, who fought Javon Clark on the same card, you know, Dubois nearly stopped him. So was that not a sign there that maybe they should have hung fire on it? But because negotiations had fell through with Richard Biakpour, they needed somebody to put into place, and Jordan Thompson steps in and takes his opportunity, and you know, he will learn from that. I just hope it doesn't damage him as a fighter, because it was a destruction. Jai Opetaia he was so fast, he was so accurate, he didn't care what was coming at him, but he had that movement to slip everything and get on the inside, and that's exactly what he did against the much bigger fighter. Got on the inside and absolutely put it on Thompson, and as soon as Thompson got hit with a really clean left, I think it was a left straight that he got hit with, that was it. He was kind of, I knew then it was over. I knew straight away that Thompson's confidence had gone. I just knew it would be a matter of time before he absolutely took it out of him. Eddie's saying Jai Opetaia is now the best cruiserweight on the planet. Is he the best cruiserweight on the planet, Johnston?
Well, he's demolished Thompson, who was well out of his depth. You know, he was several levels below this level. I'm not saying he can't get to that level, but certainly not now. It was too soon for him. We hoped that maybe he could land something to maybe change the fight against Jai Opetaia. And I did feel that he might even last a distance, because I was sort of looking at the Opetaia fight and sort of him coming off the back end of the long layoff, and obviously beating Breedis was a terrific performance. He looked great, he looked sharp, but it was the jaw and he's had surgery. That stuff plays on your mind. So for me, I sort of felt that maybe he might be a little bit more tentative and just sort of work his way into the fight. Maybe even in a way, no, I'm going to beat this guy, but maybe get the rounds under my belt. He wasn't interested in any of that, and I absolutely loved that. He was aggressive throughout. He was fast. He was accurate. He was sharp. He almost got rid of Thompson in the first round. From the first 3 minutes, you're like, wow, this guy, he looks the real deal, doesn't he? Wow. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, I know Thompson was nowhere near the level that he's not there. He's not there. Look, let's get it right. They threw him in the deep end and he drowned. Opetaia absolutely demolished him. He looked terrific. He did. He looked really good, and you can see why people would say that he's the best in the division. But look, he's got to fight Billam Smith. He's got to fight Okolie. He's got to fight Riakporhe. And 3 British guys will give him a much more difficult challenge than the one he faced against Thompson. Because them 3 do the same thing against Thompson. Let's face it. More likely, maybe not as quickly and as destructively, but Opetaia, the one thing I say about him is how good is his footwork? How good does he switch his starts? How great is his accuracy? If he can produce goods like that against our guys, then they're in for a tough fight, and there is definitely a huge claim for him to clean up this division.
Yeah, well, Amarius Breidis was there at ringside. He came on, I think, punditry at one point to talk about the potential rematch between the two of them, and maybe that will be the next course of action. But also, he was asked about the Billam Smith fight as well in the ring in the post-fight interview, and he said he'd take that fight. So, you know, his next 2 fights could be either or Brady's and Billam Smith in a different order, and I'd be happy with that. I'd want to see it, and I think he's definitely. I liked his fight with Brady. He made a fan out of me from that fight with Brady. So I was really impressed with his performance there and the grit and determination he showed. But I'll be honest with you, he's made me even more of a fan of his now after seeing that performance. It was great. And I've got to give a big shout out to his manager. His manager listens to our podcast, Matt Clark, and he listens to a lot of the series-based stuff that we do, the Career Profiles podcast. And I messaged him straight away. And the first thing I said was, wow, what a performance. And you need to get Jai on this podcast. And that's the first thing I said. And Matt's reply was, I'll see what I can do. So hopefully, Matt,
Yeah.
you'll be able to get Jai on the podcast with us, and it'll be really good to speak to him. But
In that case, he's the best in the cruiserweight division. I'm joking. We ain't one to do that. We ain't one to do that. We're not going to side. It looked great, but I still believe there's definitely tougher challenges ahead of it for him, and I'm sure Matty Clark will say the same thing, won't he?
Yeah, absolutely. They wanted the Riakporhe fight, and speaking to Matt, I knew he really wanted that fight, and his interpretation of Riakporhe not being in the fight was that, in his words, he shit it. That was what Matt said. He said Riakporhe shitted it, and you can understand why people would say that, but I do think there was issues with Ben Shalom going on as well, and I think that was part of the problem as to why that fight didn't happen. However, Jai looked great, and he got the victory, and now, like you said, Johnson, we see them fights, the rematch for Brady's, Bill and Smith, or Bill and Smith first, then Brady's, whatever order it comes in, I'm happy to see it, because I want to see whether he can do the business against these guys. And if he does, then yeah, absolutely, I'll hold my hands up and say he's definitely the best cruiserweight in the division, and I think he could rule the cruiserweight division. I really do. I just think we need them fights. We need to see him against these different opponents, and I think he definitely made a lot of fans of British people this weekend. I definitely think that. I think a lot of people really enjoyed listening to him and his mindset and his mentality, and I think he's a big star for the future, and I'm certain that there'll be a big show in Australia where he'll be headlining, and he'll have 2 belts by the time he does that, but there's definitely a good opportunity for him, being one of the great Australian boxers, which will be really, really good for, obviously, Australian fight fans. I know you guys listen all the way from down under, and you love our show, and it's great that you've got a fighter now who you can really cling on to, who will hopefully, along with obviously Tim Tszyu, of course, hopefully, these will start to sort of bring this emergence of Australian boxing onto the forefront for you guys as well. But yeah, they were the 2 big fights, Johnson, this weekend. But as we said, there was lots of a variety of fights going on this weekend, and where do you want to start? What do you want to go with? What was the other moment of the weekend, barring the 2 big fights, that you really want to talk about?
For me, I would have to probably say the Lubin fight. I'm going to go with the Lubin fight because of the fact is I don't think he won it. And again, you get those situations where you get another controversial scorecard. How Lubin has come away with a unanimous decision. For those that didn't know, he was on the undercard of obviously the Canelo Charlo card. It's just beyond me at times. Ramos, for me, won the fight. I didn't even need to score it. He was in control. He threw more punches than Lubin. I mean, the punch counts I'm never always great with, in terms of I don't see it as someone counting punches. Sometimes they counting them correctly. Look, there's this human error there, but you didn't even need to count the punches to know that Ramos Jr. landed a hell of a lot more than Lubin, who spent a lot of his time on the ropes. The only time Lubin you could give him a round or 2 is when Ramos took those rounds off, and he's got to learn, Ramos, from this, because the one thing he said is, I shouldn't be leaving this to the judges. I need to be finishing this with my left hook and my right way, with my punches. I need to be ending this inside the distance, which is something that Joe Frazier learned a long time ago in his career, and with his career profile. He's, he was always told to end fights in the distance. Don't take rounds off, because if you can get rid of the guy, get rid of him. I feel that he could have got rid of Lubin. He should have got rid of Lubin. But to his credit, he stayed on his feet, and how he got that car. I mean, how it's a unanimous, Sean. I mean, a 117, 111, what the hell is that guy watching? 116, 112, again, what? I don't get it. I don't understand how Lubin has come away with a unanimous, with scorecards like that. And people may say that some of those rounds were close. They weren't close. Some of them were easy to score, and Ramos Jr. should have won that fight, hands down. I mean, I had him 3 or 4 rounds up. But as again, I wasn't watching the fight, scoring it in my head. It was just obvious to see with my eyes. I'm watching it, and I can see Ramos is winning this fight. So, shocked to that decision. Another terrible performance from the judges. I'm dismayed at it, Sean. I really am. How someone could give Lubin 6 rounds. I'll watch this fight again next week and see if I change my mind. I don't think I will.
The worst part about it is that all 3 judges gave it to him. It wasn't like a split decision.
All 3. Yeah.
All 3. I don't. That's the part I don't understand. All 3 of them saw it the same way. Some of them, obviously, 2 of them saw it a lot wider than the 3rd judge, who had it 115, 113. But Yeah, it's just one of them travesties yet again in boxing that hopefully it won't plague Ramos's career, but I'd feel aggrieved by that. 100%, I'd be feeling really annoyed because to have 3 judges say that the other guy won the fight when it is quite evident that it wasn't the case, it is really disheartening. It's really, I feel for him. I just hope they can sort something out with it, whether it's some sort of rematch or.
Oh, Luigi won't go near him.
Nah.
See, he'll be like, no, don't try him again. No need.
No, they won't. They'll move on. They'll be pushing forward now. What'll probably happen is they'll try and push themselves into a position to work their way up the WBO rankings and maybe get a shot at Tim Tszyu, who's now WBO champion. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of the money fight's the next one on the horizon for them. But
on that performance, Lubin's getting wiped out by Tim. Absolutely, for me.
Yeah, I agree. Well, other fights on that card then, just whipping around the card and just letting you guys know of other fights that you probably would have tuned into, or if you didn't, well, the results were as follows. Yordenis Ugas lost a unanimous decision to Mario Barrios. I know somebody who you fancied to win that fight, actually, Johnston, and you nailed that.
I found, he worked well behind the jab there. I really enjoyed his performance. I knew it. So many people went for Ugas, but I just felt that Barrios, I know he had a couple of defeats in his record, but it was not a mover, Ugas. Obviously, he's at prime of his career. Barrios, tremendous jab, good accuracy, bust up his eye. Yeah, great performance.
And then we also had Elijah Garcia going to 16-0. 8th round TKO over Jose Armando Resendiz. Frank Sanchez, well, he took a little bit of a wobble in his fight, but he came back to stop Scott Alexander in the 4th round as he moves on in his career. Alexander Gerdvik moves on again now. He's 20-1 after getting a 2nd round KO. Again, in the light heavyweight division, we said in the preview, wonder what's next for him. He's now had some really good back-to-back wins. It wouldn't surprise me if he's in line for a shot at a title later on down the line. Of course, we've got Peterbiev versus Smith in January, the rescheduled bout, and it really depends on obviously of what Bivol does next, whether he goes down to 168, as to whether Gerdvik will get a big fighter for a title in this division. Terrell Gaethje got the victory by a majority decision, and Beck Nurmagomedov, he got a 3rd round KO to move to 11-0. And I just wanted to take a minute or two just to mention obviously Kamel Moton, who got the victory on his debut in the 1st round of that fight. And what was more interesting about the fight, not so much the fight, should I say, the aftermath of the fight, there was a question posed to him about how he sees himself compared to someone like an Inoue. And his response was very much a Mayweather-esque response about how he feels he will be a much better fighter than Inoue ever was. And I just thought, this is just Floyd Mayweather all over.
I mean, it's brilliant. And there was a lot of uproar about the fact that he was supposed to be on the undercard. People were looking out for him. Mayweather, as we said, he put the pressure on Moton. On Moton, I should say. No, I've got to stop calling him Moton. Moton. He put the pressure on him by saying how great he's going to be. He's had just a tremendous amateur career, amateur background. So you can understand. But a lot of interest was on him. Everyone wanted to see him, and he wasn't on the undercard. He actually fought after the main event. So not sure what happened there. A lot of people were a bit disappointed with that. They wanted to see him before the main event. But it happened after, and he got rid of the guy. Flores wasn't interested. I mean, it was all his way. But yeah, great. I mean, look, the geezer's got a big head already at such a young age, and with Mayweather in his corner, he's only going to get larger. And then the more he wins, the more it's going to get even worse. But look, if he can keep producing the goods, then great. It's his debut. We've got a long way to go. Yeah, hell of a long way to go before you start comparing him with any of these top fighters. And it's just Mayweather creating the stir, which is what he does very well.
Yeah, of course it will be. In a few fights down the line, we'll be talking about how he wants him in the ring with certain people. I mean, he was saying he wants to fight Lee Wood. I mentioned this in the preview. How he was saying he wants to fight Lee Wood for the WBA title already. He's ready for him. And it's like, right, okay, you've got some confidence there. But we shall see how his career pans out, of course. So we'll move back to the UK, talk about the Jai Opetaia and Jordan Thompson undercard, and of course the boxer card as well at the York Hall. Mentioned Caroline Dubois before we close this show. So on the undercard, we had Ellie Scottney retaining her title via unanimous decision. Good fight on the undercard with Siobhan Clark versus Vasyl Ducar. I thought that was a really good fight for Siobhan Clark. I think he was trying his best to get Ducar out of there, but Dakara's a really, really tough guy. His record, I think, doesn't really do him justice. 14-6-2 going into this fight. It doesn't do him justice at all because he was really tough in there. He was a really good fight for Clark, and he put on a really good performance. I really enjoyed seeing him getting some issues to deal with, some adversity to overcome, and he looked pretty slick in there at times, and he looked a pretty hard puncher, but Dubois just seems to be made of iron. He's like a piece of iron. He really is. He's just he really wouldn't let up in that fight, and it was good to see Clark getting that level of test. He needed something like that, in my opinion. So it was good to see him getting that victory. He now picks up a IBF International Cruiserweight title, which will put him really good stead in the IBF rankings, of course, going forward. But definitely somebody now to be watching out for. That was his 7th fight. I think by 10 fights down the line, we're going to be looking at him in a big cruiserweight fight. And we've just been talking about Jai Opetaia in the cruiserweight division. Obviously, we've got Riakporhe. We've got Okoli still in the cruiserweight division. Whether he stays there or not is another thing. And then, of course, we've got Chris Billam-Smith, who's champion in the division as well. So I think Siobhan Clark will be... it won't be long before he's nipping at the heels of all these guys, because I think it won't be long before he's ready for that, because he's shown that he's got the ability to move up pretty quickly with his great amateur pedigree that he had. So that was great to see that on there. And it was great to see Rhiannon Dixon as well winning the vacant EBU European lightweight title over Katarina Thandes, a former opponent of Terry Harper. She went the distance with Thandes, but she was really good. Looked really good in there. I think she's definitely one to keep watching. I think she will move on pretty quickly now, as she's got the Commonwealth title and now she's got the European title. I don't think it'll be long before they're proposing her for a fight in this division, and it'll all depend on what happens with Katie Taylor. Of course, Katie Taylor is rematching Chantal Cameron, so will Katie Taylor's lightweight undisputed crown become fragmented, and will it allow for people like Rhiannon Dixon to be able to get in there and fight for a world title, whichever one it may be? Keep your eyes peeled for that, because I think that might actually happen with where the career is going of Katie Taylor at this stage. On the undercard as well, we had Maisie Rose Courtney, George Lillard, and the debut of Jemmy Sains, who all got victories in their particular fights. But let's take a few moments just to talk about Caroline Dubois becoming the IBO lightweight champion, Johnston. What did you think of her performance?
Oh, brilliant. Really enjoy watching Caroline. Sweet Caroline. She's she's got something about her. The girl, again, with just having that amateur background that you've seen with Opetaia, he had it as well. And you just see the difference when they're at that level, top level, in amateur fighting. Even if they lose fights in championships and Olympics or whatever else you want to throw at me, or European, but it doesn't matter. Having that background is always huge. That helps you progress into a professional. And Caroline, you can see that she was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Her body shots were terrific. Credit to the Rodriguez. Is it Rodriguez, the Mexican girl? She really bit down. She used all the tricks in the trade as well, spitting the gum shield out when she got put down in one of the rounds, and then a heavy knockdown as well. She got back up and managed to grind it out, bending down again. The mouthpiece coming out. She did everything turning her back, and Caroline was getting vexed because she's like, I just want to get rid of her. And she was just brilliant. And to be fair, right in the last minute of the round as well, of the fight of the 12th round, and Caroline got caught. She got caught a couple of times. So she definitely got a bit stunned because she really wanted to get the knockout. Maybe a little bit loaded up a bit too much. Needs to just go back to working behind that jab. If you knock someone down, then you want to try and go for the kill. And the other girl's a bit too savvy. She's a bit too clued up. She can prevent you from hitting her clean, then maybe just back up, go work behind that jab again, get back to your boxing and find them openings and then go for it. So that'd be the one thing I'd say are critical of Caroline. But you just mentioned it there with Rhiannon Dixon. She's in a position where now can she fight for a lightweight title? Same thing with Caroline. I know Katie's sort of holding these titles up at the minute. What's going to happen? Are they going to become fragmented? If they did, sweet Caroline, she's in there with a shout, and so is Dixon. So maybe that's a fight down the line for a world title. Who knows? But yeah, really, just the performance in general was great. And credit to the Mexican girl that she managed to survive. She just used that experience, really, didn't she, Sean? And she bit down on the gumshoe when she needed to, came back when she needed to. She was limited. Caroline was superb. Great foot movement and execution of shots, body shots, brilliant. And there was even a shot where someone was landed literally on the belt line, yeah, and the referee called it low. So just to rephrase from the fact that a few weeks ago we was having a discussion about low blows, if it's on the belt line, as that referee clearly instructed, it was below the belt, and she was told to put her hands up. Just wanted to make that point.
No, I'm glad you did, because that was controversial only a few weeks ago, and now the controversy's died off a bit. Now there's another moment there where you can point people to it and say, look, the referee gave the clear instruction, so anything below where the referee says it's an invisible belt line, essentially, is low. Doesn't matter whether... Yeah, exactly. So you've got to remember that. So anybody that still thinks that it wasn't a low blow, Daniel Dubois, the other week, then, go and watch this one, because it's quite evident.
You don't have to hit someone in the bollocks for it to be a low blow. That is that's probably disqualification. A low blow isn't getting smashed in the balls. And Tyson Fury likes to bring that out, doesn't he? Where's his bollocks kind of thing. I mean, he even said that up in his belly. No. You know the rules, Tyson, but you're just trying to make a mockery of it and cause the stir. But yeah, just wanted to make that point. But Caroline, brilliant, Sean. I can't wait to watch her next fight. She's just great to watch.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing where, again, her career goes. And I think with the division being as it is at the moment, and potentially belts being fragmented, as I said, with Rhiannon Dixon, there's an opportunity there to see some really big fights for British fighters involved in it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I just hope, in some ways, Katie doesn't cling on to them titles for too much longer, because, don't get me wrong, I'm happy. She deserved to be champion. She earned that right. Of course she did. But she's now fighting back up at the next division again in a rematch. How much longer are all the organisations going to allow her to keep hold of their belts, really, before they start giving other people opportunities? So we'll see. We'll see how that pans out as, obviously, we get towards the end of the year when we get to that November.
Crazy you say that. You mentioned Charlo straight away. He gets stripped of his title by one organisation straight away. So it's your name that carries the weight, isn't it?
It is. That's the thing. I think it swings around about sometimes. Like, sometimes they can strip a fighter really quickly over something that's trivial, and sometimes if it's someone like a Katie Taylor or somebody that's so sort of well regarded within the sport, that they'll give him a bit more of time to be able to get involved in these bigger fights and still allow them to keep the titles. However, it's not fair to other fighters who are chomping at the bit. So again, we'll just see. With the rematch happening on November 25th, that will really tell us all. If Katie takes another defeat, what will she do next? That'll be the question, won't it? What will she do next? Will she move back down and fight and defend them titles, or will she call time on her career? I think there's a chance if she loses again, she could call time on her career. So we'll talk about that for another day, of course. But there's one final fight I wanted to just mention. That was the Murat Gassiev-Otto Wallin fight, a split decision victory for Otto Wallin, which was a surprise to some, with it being in Turkey. They thought that maybe Gassiev would get the decision here. He did on one card, 117, 111, which was really wide. The 115, 113 cards for Otto Wallin was probably more accurate in this fight. I did watch back on the fight, and it was a scrappy affair at times. It wasn't an entertaining fight, in my personal opinion. However, I think now we've seen these two guys. I think a lot of people thought Gassiev would win, actually. Just as a side note, a lot of people thought Gassiev would be too big and too strong, and I know you did, but I think Wallin, as I mentioned in the preview, he gave Tyson Fury some problems when he fought him. It really did give him some problems. He's a good boxer. He really is a good boxer, and I think that'll hopefully help him move on into a bigger fight now. I'm not sure of his ceiling. I'm not sure of where he gets to in the heavyweight division. I don't essentially think he's going to be a world champion, but I think he'll certainly be in with big fighters. I think he deserves an opportunity, having won this fight now. But we'll see. But it wasn't the most exciting fight, but I felt like we needed to mention it because it was one we mentioned in the preview, because there was a lot of fights going on. There was so many of them to cover. It was nigh on impossible to literally cover every single fight that had gone on this weekend. Another side note, of course, Callum Simpson getting a victory on the Caroline Dubois undercard. He got a unanimous decision over 10 rounds. Then Vidal Riley got a unanimous decision over 10 rounds against Nathan Qualas to become the cruiserweight champion of England, which was a good win for him. Another side note, Stephen McKenna, he got a good win against Darren Tetley and called out Josh Taylor. Practically said, I want to fight Josh Taylor. And Josh Taylor come out on social media and said he is basically a sparring partner, quite literally. So maybe, just maybe, there might be a bit of a Celtic clash going on down the line between these two. I think Josh, at this stage of his career, can pick who he wants to pick as an opponent because of what he's done and where he's at in his career. But someone like McKenna might force the hand of Josh Taylor, especially with that old Irish-Scottish rivalry going on there. There's certainly a potential for that fight to happen in the future. Maybe as Josh starts to wind down his career, he might see that as an opportunity. But if you're Josh Taylor, you kind of probably thinking, yeah, I'm not taking this at the moment. I want the big fights. I want the money, doesn't he? Wants to be back in America fighting for big money again. So I can't see that happening as well. But I think that's about it for this weekend's fights. And the main content of this episode really was to talk about Canelo and Charlo. And we think Benavidez or Bivol at 168 is got to be the ideal fight for Canelo and his legacy next. And I'd be interested to see what people are saying about that, whether people feel the same as us or whether they have something else in mind. And I think it'd be a good idea to let us know on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter, or if you want to contact us at any of the other social media platforms, you can do so at BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. And if you're watching or listening on YouTube, you'll be able to drop a comment below to give us your thoughts and feelings on what you think is next for Canelo Alvarez. That is it, though, for this episode. We are back this week with a preview for Wood versus Warrington, and we will be back with another little shoot in the breeze segment as Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk has officially, according to Frank Warren and K2 Promotions, apparently it's all been signed. It's all been done and dusted. We don't believe it until we see these two guys get in the ring, of course, but
I certainly don't. I don't.
We're
Wait. Once I see him in the ring, I'll know for sure.
Well, we're definitely going to have a proper sit down and talk about that in a separate segment for Shooting the Breeze later on in the week. But that is it for this episode. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to the Big Fight Reaction on BTR Boxing Podcast Network.